So yes, my name is David Gageot. So I'm a developer advocate for Google Cloud. I'm based out of Paris, France. I love everything that's related to developer experience. I was a developer 20 years, and I love cats, and there's no connection between the two. You can find me on GitHub, Twitter, like basically everywhere with the same login, DGAGOT. So if you have questions that you don't want to ask me during the session, you can ask them offline or online. Yeah. So, who wants to transform a legacy Java application using Kubernetes and Istio? Yeah, it's like on Monday. I have to work on that, exactly. So I don't know if it's going to be fun for you. I'll try to make it, maybe not fun, but I'll try to make it easy to understand. And I'll try to show you how powerful it is to use Kubernetes and containers and Istio. And to make that a bit more fun, I choose an application that you might know. I choose the good old pet store. Who knows the Java pet store? Quite a few people. Okay, quite a few. Who don't know what it is. Like, you don't know. Okay, few people. So the pet store was basically a demonstration of the power of Java platform, the Java language. So it was a multi-tier application that basically shows you a store where you can buy animals like cats, dogs, snakes, birds. And the very first version was developed by Sun, I guess, and to show the language and the platform. And there's been quite a few additional versions developed by other people. I took this version that shows the Java EE7, whatever it is, platform, okay? So the developers, they left the team, okay? Nobody wants to work on that, to be clear. I mean, we have this application, it's running in production, nobody wants to work on it. Nobody wants to touch a single line of code of it, okay? Does it happen to you? Do you work on projects where people don't want to touch it or they don't know how to touch it? So we're going to try to take that application, which is very simple, but it's a good demonstration of a real big legacy application, and we're going to try to improve it, modify it, without touching a single line of code of it, okay? We're going to change it from the outside. It's going to be fun. So, the beauty of the monolith. Okay. So this is the architecture of my application. Everything in one JVM. Like there's a front end, there is the database, there is a REST API, like monitoring, everything built into a single application running on a single machine. And it's quite easy. It's simple, easy to understand, easy to use. It used to be easy to develop, not anymore. And you connect to it to a single URL. To get started, to improve my application, I'm going to first try to make it run inside a Docker container. Who knows Docker containers? Docker? Yeah. Okay. We've done our job at Docker at the time. And who's using Docker for real? Okay, cool. So I'm not going to spend too much time on Docker. I'm just going to show you that you can take the sources for that application, build the application, and run it using Docker. And it basically works with 99% of the applications that can run on Linux. You can build them and run them inside a container. And it's maybe the same for Windows applications now. You can take the sources and run them inside a Windows container. So I'm gonna build my application using Docker. So I wrote a Docker file. Who knows Docker files? Yeah, okay. So Docker files are basically the recipe that Docker will follow to take the sources from my application. They are hosted on GitHub, but they could be hosted somewhere else. Take the sources, build the application, put it inside a Docker image, and that Docker image, I can use it to run my application on a server or on a desktop where Docker is installed. So basically, all I have to do is something like Docker build. I have to give it a name, point to the local directory, and it's going to build my application. Because I built it already on my machine, it's very quick, but in real life, it can take minutes or maybe hours, I don't know. It's going to download a lot of things from the internet, but I run it already on my machine, very quick. So now I've got a Docker image I can use to run my application. I'm going to run it in a different window. It's going to be more fun. Docker run, and I give it the name of the Docker image I just built. So obviously, it's starting a Java EE application server. It's going to take some time. Okay, Docker containers cannot do anything for you. If it was slow to start outside of Docker, it's still slow, and we've got a pet store running inside a container. Yeah. Yeah, I know. It's so beautiful. I mean, those images, really nice. I mean, I think they spent quite some time to come up with this application. They could have spent like one more day to put nice images. I don't know. Whatever. So this is the application page store. You can see that the URLs are not nice. It's like, at that time, when you put a war inside an application server, it would serve it from a sub-URL. It's not really nice for my current needs. So we're going to try to improve that. But it runs. So the message here, you can take basically any application, build it inside a container, run it. You can like take really any language, any framework, and run them inside containers. People tend to be very, very shy about that, or they tend to think that it's going to be very complicated. It's not so complicated. And sometimes it's very difficult to come up with the environment to build your application inside a container. It's much easier. Okay, so now we're going to deploy it on a cluster, because I've got a big cluster with one node. Okay, there's only one node for me right now, because I'm using Docker Desktop here. Who knows Docker Desktop? Docker for Mac, Docker for Windows? Oh, only a few people. So you should really try it if you're using Docker and you're on Mac or Windows. It's an application that gives you Docker on a machine that's not Linux. And a nice thing about it is that you can set up a Kubernetes cluster with just one click. You click this checkbox here, and you've got a full single node Kubernetes cluster set up just for you. And this is what I'm going to use for my demos. Everything is going to run locally on my machine. Okay? So I'm going to deploy that on Kubernetes. Who's using Kubernetes here? A few people. Okay. So for those who don't know what Kubernetes is, it's basically something you install on a set of machines. And once this is installed, you get a CLI and an API to schedule your applications, your workloads. It can be like stateful applications, stateless applications, jobs, cron jobs, whatever. It can be extended. There's like a standard API to extend it. So you can like build on top of it, and you can also deploy your applications on it. And basically, when you deploy applications on Kubernetes, the idea is that you describe what you want to deploy in YAML files. Yeah, YAML files. Who likes YAML files? Yeah, if you don't like them, you're going to have to like them. Especially for that presentation, I'm going to show you a lot of YAML files, which is the new code. Like, I'm not going to touch a single line of code, but I'm going to touch a lot of YAML files. So basically the same. So what was I saying? So yeah, you're going to describe in YAML files what you want to deploy, and Kubernetes will deploy it for you, and will make sure it is actually running, it is actually, it's running actually what you wanted it to deploy. So here I have to use two types of objects in Kubernetes. One is the deployment, so a lot of YAML, basically, just to say that I'm going to start this container somewhere on my cluster. I don't have to think about IP addresses or server names or whatever. I have a bunch of machines, and I just give it YAML and Docker images, and it's going to run somewhere. And then to expose that application to my users, I'm going to use a service. Service is another type of object that you have in Kubernetes. And basically, I'm going to set up a load balancer so that my users, me, can connect to port 8080 and reach my application, my container, okay? So I'm going to try to do that. So the image was built, sorry. I'm going to use the kubectl CLI that talks to Kubernetes, and I'm going to do apply, and I give it a folder where there's the 2 YAML files I showed you. So why is it already working? I don't know. So I've got a kubectl API, so I can ask a lot of questions, like what is running on my machine? So you can see here that it has created a deployment. This is what I asked. It has created a service. This is what I asked. And it has created what's called a pod. A pod is the smallest component, the smallest concept in Kubernetes. So in a pod, you can run one or many containers. The containers that run inside a pod will run on the same machine. It's a guarantee. You are sure that the components that you describe in your pod will run on the same machine. They could talk to each other on localhost, and they can share information on the disk, for example, whatever. So here I've got one pod, and one pod is running my application. So it looks like it was deployed. I don't know. I deployed it before. I don't know. So yeah, it's deployed on Kubernetes. Okay, cool. So it was quite easy. Containerize, send it to Kubernetes, quite nice. But what can I do from that? I'm going to skip that. Yeah. What I really want to do, I want to improve my application, right? This is what I told you. So I'm going to improve the application. I'm going to start very small, just for you to understand a few very important concepts. So I'm going to start by improving my application without touching a single line of the application using what I call a facade. Something that's in front of my application that's going to get all the queries from my users and pass them to the backend, to the pet store, okay? So basically, my users will still connect on the same port, but their queries will not go directly to the pet store container. They will go to a facade container. In that case, I chose Nginx. I could choose any HTTP proxy, HTTP server, reverse proxy. So I chose Nginx, but it could be HA proxy, traffic, anything. Who knows Nginx? Yeah. It's basically one of those building blocks that you have heard about. It's very useful to combine multiple web applications, put a front end on top of it, and do some changes in that front end. So here, I'm going to implement some of the features inside Nginx. So, for example, I saw that my application doesn't have a proper 404 page. When I type a random URL, I've got the default message. I want something better. I want to shorten the URLs. / application pet store, too long. I'm going to shorten that. It's not more than enough. I want to serve everything as gzip. Okay. I could do a lot of changes using Nginx. I'm going to just show those three. So the thing is, what's nice in Kubernetes is with this notion of pod, I can guarantee that the Nginx and the pet store will run on the same machine. When my users will connect to that application, they will go through Nginx that will send the information to pet store. This is very useful. It will never run on two different machines. So what do I have to write to do that? YAML files, yeah. So I'm going to have to change my deployment. I'm going to add another container inside my pod. I'm going to change the service that exposed my application to the users. It used to serve on port 80, it used to connect to the pet store. Now it's going to connect to the Nginx, but it will still serve on port 8080. And I've got a Docker file and an Nginx configuration. You don't really have to read them. It's just the other container needs to be built, and it needs to do something. Okay. So usually what I would do is Docker build my 2 images and kubectl apply. But I've got a tool that I'm going to use for my demo that does all of that in a single step. So with that step, I'm going to build the 2 images, so the pet store and the front end, and I'm going to send them, all of them, to Kubernetes, and I should have something running. Yeah, it should be 8080, if it works. So there's the demo effect, of course. So for example, here I cannot right-click, okay, so I don't know why. Why cannot I right-click? I'm going to try in a different window. Okay, demo effect. I knew something was wrong before I run the command. So let's go back. Do you like demo effects? No, not really. Do you want me to succeed? Yes, please. Okay, so service, yeah. See, this should be exposed on port 8080. It's just that the service is going to talk to the Nginx, which itself is running on port 80. Okay, the port 80 here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that everything was deleted. I'm going to make sure that maybe I forgot to run that before my demo. Reset script. You know reset scripts? Nice. And I'm going to try again. I'm going to try again. Cross fingers. Come on. Oh, come on. Okay. Something is very wrong. Very, very, very wrong. Oh, come on. Yeah, pet store. Woo! Let's go back here. See this one, I don't know. Reload frame. Yeah, pet store. So it should be okay after that. It's always the first one that's complicated. So I don't know if you see it, but the URLs now are shorter. Okay? Because Nginx is doing some kind of magic on the URLs, and the application still thinks it was asked to one URL, but in fact, it is shown with another URL. And if we go to, if we go to Chrome Inspector, and we type, I don't know, a random URL, we should have like a proper 404 page. I don't know who knows Antonio, but this is Antonio, the one who wrote the pet store. Java champion. Let's go back to the application, and we should make sure that everything is now gzipped. So we're gonna say gzip, yes, gzip. It's very small, but it's gzip. So this is just to show you that you can modify an application from the outside. It's just that you have to combine containers. It's maybe the first time in my life where I can really see applications being combined like Legos, okay? We all dreamt about Legos that you could combine, and in the software industry, we all said, okay, this new technology is going to make it possible. With Kubernetes and Docker, we're almost there. I mean, Kubernetes, Docker, and HTTP. We're almost there. Okay, so we know how to change our application from the outside. That's cool. In fact, that facades like this, or proxies, or we call them sidecars in the Kubernetes world, it's very, very powerful. You can do a lot of things with such pattern, okay? You can really intercept the traffic before sending it to one container or multiple containers. You can change the query, you can change the response, you can inject retries, you can inject anything you want. And you can also change the response, so you can change the style, you can change the logic, you can do anything with such a pattern, okay? I'm going to show you something that really uses this pattern later. So try to remember the facade pattern. So let's bring more improvements, because like gzip and 404 page, it's not really nice. So just so that we all understand, this is a typical application that's deployed on a Kubernetes cluster. Usually we have in blue all the containers. For my application, there's only one container in one pod, but usually multi services application will run in different pods, and basically the traffic from users will go through an ingress system. The ingress is like the gateway for your cluster, and all the traffic is going through the ingress, is then sent to container, and containers, they talk to each other directly, okay? So this is a typical deployment on Kubernetes. I'm going to show you Istio. Istio does something differently. Istio is using the facade pattern I just showed you, but makes it even more powerful. So the idea is that when I'm going to deploy my application on Kubernetes, I'm going to deploy those blue containers, but Istio is going to extend Kubernetes to make sure that inside each pod, there is a small HTTP proxy that's injected and that captures all the traffic in and out of the containers, so that the traffic that comes from my users, it's going through an envoy, then to the containers, then through an envoy, to the next envoy, through a container, etc., and goes back to the user. And at each envoy level, Istio is able to change the queries, change the response, change the destination, inject retries, a lot of things. And it's just using the small facade pattern I just showed you with Nginx. It's just that here it's using a different HTTP proxy called Envoy, which is a proxy written in C++, but it's exactly the same. It's just that it comes with a lot of features that Istio will leverage to create what we call a service mesh. Service mesh. So service mesh is to connect all your services. For my application, there's only one monolith, but we're going to try to extract some services to make it more interesting. Okay? So one thing that Istio can do is also you can capture a lot of information and send them to the rest of the system. So I'm going to start by using Istio. I'm going to deploy a new version of my application with a beautiful style sheet. Beautiful. And I'm going to configure Istio Ingress system so that depending on which domain users are using, it's going to send the traffic to one application or one version of the pet store or the other version. So it's going to do the routing based on the domain. So you don't have to use Istio for that. Kubernetes doesn't know how to do that, but you can install a lot of components to do that. There's what we call ingress controllers you can install on Kubernetes, and they do that. Istio has an ingress controller that I'm going to use. So I'm going to have to create a new deployment. I'm going to give it a new name, new labels. It's going to start a new, the same legacy pet store, but a new front end based on Nginx. So this is like the deployment I had before. This is the new one. They're going to both run on the same cluster, maybe on the same node, maybe on different nodes. On my machine, there's only one node, so it's going to be on the same node, but in real life, it could be on different nodes. And I configured Istio. I configured a gateway, so I want to spend a few seconds on that. So this type of object, gateway, it does not exist in Kubernetes. If you install Kubernetes, you cannot send a YAML with gateway object. It does not exist. It's just that Kubernetes can be extended, and Istio extended the platform. With Istio, we now have new types of objects that will configure the envoy components, that will configure everything that's related to Istio. So here, I just created a gateway that is going to recognize two domain names, and I'm going to configure one rule, which is a virtual service. I'm going to say that if the users connect with that domain, it's going to talk to that service, so the dev version of my pet store. And if people connect with that domain, it's going to talk with that service. Once again, virtual service, this is not something you get from Kubernetes. This is something you get from Istio. And I'm going to show you that this virtual service is very, very, very powerful. This is where you configure the envoys proxies. So I'm going to first start by deleting everything I did to make sure, because demo effect. I'm going to activate Istio for my Kubernetes namespace. Boom, it's activated. So now I can send the YAML files with my gateway and my virtual services, and it should be okay. So let's do that. Let's try it. So I've sent my my YAML files, and very shortly I should see something start. So this is the second demo. So this is the second failure usually, right? Oh, come on. Yeah, you can do it. So one of the problems that I have, just to explain you the problems, is that I always show that on my machine, and I go from room to room, and it's switching from one Wi-Fi to the other Wi-Fi, so it's changing all the IP addresses, and sometimes it's Docker that doesn't like it, sometimes it's Kubernetes, sometimes it's Istio, sometimes it's a combination, and sometimes it's a mess. So sometimes, when it fails, I have to restart Istio, which I don't want to do, but maybe I have to. What is nice is that everything is described in my YAML files, so I can just shut down everything, restart it, and it should work. Let's try again to do that. Oh, so I ran scaffold run in the wrong directory. That's the reason why. Previous window, wrong directory. New window, good directory. So you can see here that the gateway was created. So obviously it was not created before. My two ingress rules, they are created. The pet store deployment is unchanged because it used to run with the same parameters, and the dev environment was created, etc., etc. So can we see a pet store now, please, please, please? I want to see a pet store, really, like really. Sometimes it's slow, but it's not fun. Okay. What I'm going to do, I'm going to give it like a few seconds. Maybe you can ask a few questions. If it doesn't work, I'm going to restart Istio. Maybe a few questions?
Yes. You talk about the Envoy working on a HTTP protocol.
Yes.
Is it the only protocol?
No, no, no. So Envoy recognizes a few protocols like gRPC, HTTP, HTTPS, recognizes TCP, but with TCP it cannot do a lot of things. It can just intercept the traffic, send it to a destination, and then count the bytes, which is not fun. Okay. Another question while I'm restarting Istio. So funny. This is how you reinstall Istio. It could work or not. I don't know. Ooh. It's better. Okay, dev. Yeah! See? So I'm sorry. It always fails, but it's always nice to show that everything is described in YAML files. You can just shut down and restart. You don't want to do that in production, but it's nice to know you can do it. So if I switch back to the other domain, oh, come on. Believe me, it should work. Okay, we're going to forget this one. So, I'm not in the right. You should have told me. Okay, no. Do you think it's going to work? I'm going to open it in a new tab. So, I'm going to remove that silly full screen mode. So dev works. Not dev works. Okay. I'm going to pretend I know what I'm doing. Okay. So this is something simple. You don't need Istio to do that. Istio does it. You don't need Istio. You can do it with any Ingress controller. But can we do something better? Yes, we can do something better. And this is really powerful in Istio. We can do, for example, a Canary deployment. So a Canary deployment is a situation where you deploy the same application twice on your cluster, two different versions. So my V1 and my dev version. So like the ugly skin and the ugly skin but newer. And you're going to say that users connect on the same URL same domain, but they're going to be sent to one version or the other based on who they are, like based on HTTP headers, based on a cookie, based on whatever. So here I'm going to base it on a HTTP header. I'm going to say that if the user is David, he's going to talk to the dev version. If he's any other user, he's going to talk to the V1. It's very useful. You can deploy as many versions as you want on the same cluster, and then you can switch users to different versions. So this is not something that's possible with plain Kubernetes. So basically what you have to do is you have to take the configuration I showed you, the virtual service, and instead of just binding a domain name to a backend, you can also match a few parameters. So you can match, for example, the headers. HTTP headers, if the user is exactly David, so it's key value, if it's user David, then we're going to change the destination and we're going to send it to the pet store-dev, so the new version. Otherwise, we're going to send it to the pet store. Okay? Very easy to describe, and you just have to reconfigure Istio by running this command. It's going to configure the gateway, okay? The gateway. And it should be that any user connects to the pet store, but if I change my headers, I've got an extension to do that. If I say that my user is David, then I've got the new version, okay? So it's very powerful to do internal testing of as many versions as I want. And clearly this is not something you can do out of the box with Kubernetes. You can still do it with an Ingress controller. What is nice with Istio is that it works at the Ingress level, so at the gateway of your cluster, but it also works between services. Remember that diagram where the traffic goes through the envoy and through all the microservices and back to the envoy, to the user? At each envoy, you can switch the destination based on HTTP headers. This is very powerful. You can just deploy one microservice in a new version and change the traffic destinations based on HTTP headers. I showed you how to do that at the Ingress level, but you can do it between services. Another thing you can do is you can do a blue-green deployment. Who knows blue-green deployment or red-black deployment? So it's always very tricky to do. It should be very easy with stateless applications. With stateful, it is complicated. Here, my pet store is stateless. I can only buy animals. So I'm going to use a blue-green deployment. Once again, this is not something that's possible with Kubernetes. Kubernetes, you can have, maybe you can take a pod and replicate it, and you can try to use round robin to distribute the traffic between two different versions, but it's very complicated, and also you don't have fine-grained control. Here with Istio, I'm able to say I'm going to send 99% of the users to that version and 1% to that version. And then I'm going to increase the number of users that talk to the new version. And it's quite easy to do. All you have to do is write YAML. So you're going to change the same file, and I'm going to remove the Canary deployment configuration. I'm going to configure the destination based on weights. So 80% on the old version, 20% on the new version. What do you think will be the effect of that? It's going to be fun. So most of the time, I get the old version, and sometimes I get the new version. If you're a user, it's fun. Okay? So maybe you need more complex configuration, like sticky sessions or things like that. If it's something that's done on a front-end component, it's very annoying. But if it's something that's done in the back-end, like between one service and two other services, maybe your users will not see it. Okay? Here, the only difference between my two versions is the style sheet, so of course, annoying. With Istio, you have a lot of tools you can use to monitor what's going on. I'm going to show you one of them. So I'm going to connect to one of the components that's running inside my cluster. It's a Grafana component. So Grafana, who knows Grafana? Grafana shows you dashboards. You can put anything inside those dashboards. So with Istio, there's the Grafana that's configured to show you the dashboard that take all the data from Prometheus, and Prometheus will capture all the monitoring information from the containers and the envoy proxies and the nodes, etc. So I'm going to connect to that component. And this is basically what you get out of the box when you install when you install Istio. You get that type of dashboard with not a lot of information. So I'm going to send some traffic to my application. There will be Chrome asking for the website in a loop, which is nice. So if it doesn't work, this is the third demo, so of course it should fail, right? It doesn't look good. Okay, I'm going to click here. Why don't I see all the dashboards? I should have a lot of dashboards. Yep, Istio dashboard. Oh, okay. No, it was kind of failing, yeah. So here, it's Chromium. Chromium is sending a lot of messages. I don't know why. Most of the time it's complaining about the GPU or things like that, so I don't care. But this is more interesting, and this is not really failing. It's showing me which service is responding to my queries. So I can see here that this is the pet store default, sending 200 errors, so not really errors, like good pages. Here I've got in green I've got the dev version sending me good pages, and I've got a few errors on each version, because sometimes you load the index from V1, and that's okay. But then you load the index from the dev version, and it asks the style sheet from the new version, which is sent to the old version, so nightmare. Don't do that for a style sheet. But anyways, you can see that it's basically 80%, 20%, okay? So I can change those percentage, and I can do it live. I don't have to interrupt my users or whatever. I'm going to just try to remember what it is. It's the Ingress, I think it's this one, yeah. So 80-20, I'm going to replace like this. Yeah. Scaffold run, and it will reconfigure all the envoy proxies everywhere on my cluster, and I should see the graph changing shape. I should see now that 80% of the requests are answered by the dev version and 20% by the other version. So it's going to take some time to change. Okay, so this is very powerful. You can do, I don't know, I think it's stuck. Not my day. Is it moving or I don't know. Sorry, timescale, yeah. I don't know. Okay, so I don't know. Okay, I clicked here. I don't know why. The timescale is fixed. Yeah. Thank you very much. I love it that you're with me. But you can see we changed everything. You can do it live. You can even automate it, because Kubernetes has an API, but Istio has an API. So you can build something on top of it that, for example, looks at the stats. If it's all good, I'm going to increase the weights. If there's a problem, I can just roll back. Okay? It's not included in Istio, but you can quite easily do it yourself. Woo! So, same as Canary deployments, it works also between your microservices. It's quite trivial to deploy multiple versions, like in parallel, and like deactivate them one by one. And you can make sure that, using Istio, you can make sure that everything is going right. So we're going to do something more complicated. We're going to rewrite part of the application. So basically, I try to divide my application into 4 main components. There's the UI, which is server-side. It's JSF, I guess. There's the admin pages. It's also UI. It's also server-side, but it's only for advanced users. There's a REST API that I can use to query the database, Currently, I'm not using the REST API. It's there. It's very convenient because I'm going to use it. And there's the REST that I call backend. And we're going to start by the UI. We're going to rewrite the UI. And so we're going to create a new component that's going to replace the UI, but we're not going to touch the code for the pet store, which is fun. So we're going to just ignore that code. And how do we do that? We're going to configure Istio so that depending on which URL the users call, it's going to send the queries to the pet store or to the new component. Okay? It's quite simple, in fact. I'm going to say that slash and slash UI and slash API, they go to the new UI that I wrote in Golang, and the rest will go to the pet store. And the new UI will talk to the pet store through the REST API to get like the old data. It's the same data, but with a new style. So I just need to reconfigure Istio. How do I do that? I'm gonna start a new deployment, so a new service. This is like a pod with 2 containers for my application, my new UI. We don't have to go into much details. But there's the Ingress. The Ingress is interesting. So remember the Ingress? It used to be which domains were handled by Istio. Now there's only one domain, but I've got a few rules. So I'm going to say that if the URI is slash, I'm going to send it to the UI. If it's slash UI to the UI, slash API to the UI. If it's exactly this URL, I'm going to do an HTTP redirect. And for all the other APIs, it's going to go to the pet store. Quite simple. Remember, you can do it at the Ingress level, or you can do it between your microservices. So it's very simple to take one service, break it into 2 pieces, and change which one is answering to which URL. Will it work the first time? Like, who knows? I'm going to do that, yeah. So you can see a lot of components now are going to be started. There's the new UI that's in Golang. So in Golang, we usually don't log too many information. Yeah, started, yeah. Yeah, it works. I've got a new UI. I can buy dogs. And snakes, reptiles, yeah, snakes. Okay? So here, if we go into more details, you can see that it's using a few APIs, so a few URLs, so slash UI, slash API. And then, if I go to the admin section, I'm back to the pet store, because it's a different URL. So maybe I should open it in Chrome. You would see the URLs. So this is slash UI. This is slash admin category, whatever. Okay. If I click back here, I've got an HTTP redirect that's handled by Istio to send me to the UI. And if I take a look at what kind of queries it's doing, there must be something that serves some JSON. Yeah, JSON. So the API is served by the new Golang application, but in fact, this one is querying the pet store REST API. If you query the pet store REST API, it's not that simple. It's not like very compact JSON. It's JSON that was generated from Hibernate. So lots of information. So my new component consumes that, takes only the information that are important for the UI, expose that to the UI. So I'm really trying to modernize my application. I don't touch it, but I modernize it from the outside. Very powerful pattern. So, okay, I've got a new UI. Can I close that? I don't know. Yeah. Where am I? I closed the wrong window. Is that it? No. So I'm going to try this one. This is a service graph. One problem that we have with microservices and with the approach I showed you is that the monolith was easy to understand, easy to visualize, but then if I add more components, it's more and more complicated. And maybe it's complicated to see the rules between the connections between those components. So Istio comes with something called Kiali that makes it possible to visualize your application in real time with a service graph. Yeah. Wow. So yeah, so I'm gonna send some traffic. I'm gonna send some traffic, the good old while loop. Not this one, maybe. I'm gonna send it to this URL. I'm gonna try it. I'm gonna refresh it every 5 seconds. So of course it's broken. No, it's not broken. Okay. So what you can see here is almost live the real architecture of your application. There's a lot of companies that use Istio just for that, just to visualize what is it that they've deployed. They have the documentation, they have the code, but they don't really know what they've deployed. Here, they can see what they've deployed. They can see the traffic between those components. So I don't know, there's an exclamation mark, so obviously something else is broken. It's my day. But what I should see normally is a green arrow from the ingress to the UI and a green one to the pet store. Something is broken. I've never seen this exclamation mark before. It's new for me. I don't even know what it is. There's a way to get a legend somewhere, which seems to have disappeared too. Anyways, it's very nice. We could also go back to Grafana. We would have some kind of similar information, but the graph makes it very easy to see when you're doing a blue-green deployment or a Canary deployment. It's very, very interesting. And also, I'm using an old version of Kiali, and I'm using a slightly old version of Istio, so the newest version is better, and you have like plenty of options to see, for example, the traffic rate between the components. You could also hide all the components that are not used, things like that. Very useful when it works. Yeah, no, sorry. Okay, so basically what's next? What's next? Basically, you just have to rinse and repeat. You take another component, you extract it, and you try to understand the connections between all those components, and you use Istio to reconfigure it, like on the fly. And you're going to say, for example, that you're going to extract the admin pages into a new component, and maybe the UI talks to the admin, and the admin maybe talks to nobody or talks to the REST API. It's you then, it's your job. It's the most complicated part. Like extracting, deciding what to extract, it is really complicated. But the technical parts, like configuring, wiring, it's quite easy with Istio. So Istio can do much more. If that talk was interesting to you, you can take a look at the istio.io website. It's very easy with Istio to inject retries between your services, for example. If one service is failing often, you can inject retries between your services. Because, you know, as soon as you have components talking on the network, you need some kind of retry mechanism. You don't want to put it inside all your components, so you're going to do it from the platform. You can inject circuit breakers, mirroring, health checks, whatever. And everything can be done at the ingress level or service to service. It's very powerful. That's basically it. Lots of broken demos, but it kind of worked. So I'm open to questions.
Over here? Yeah, up here, in your left. Left?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
I saw when you activated Istio, it was a beta feature. Is it somehow going to be included in Kubernetes, or it is a parallel deployment, or what is the status of...
Can you say again, sorry?
I saw when you added to Kubernetes Istio, that was a beta feature.
Okay.
Is it a parallel project, or it is going to be introducing... Yeah.
Good question. So Istio is open source. It's been there for more than a year, which is short and long at the same time. So the version that I used was 1.0.4. We now have the 1.1.1, something like that. And for 1.0, they tried to make sure that the API was stable. So some part of the API are still beta, some part of the API are still alpha. And in fact, if you go to istio.io, you've got the full list of all the features And for all of them, it will tell you if it's stable, beta, or alpha. Because Istio is really something that you can choose, you can install and use a la carte. You can really use Ingress or configure the connections between services, or you can use retries or timeouts or the monitoring or the distributed traces. You can really choose what you want. And some of those features are not stable. Like the Kiali service graph, it was not stable, the one that I showed. It was really alpha. It might be beta now. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
More questions? Yes.
Does Istio add a lot of latency or overhead to your system?
Yeah, so it depends. So basically, version after version, they reduced the overhead. The latest version, the 1.1, decreased the overhead a lot, but it can still be a big overhead. Let's say you, I don't remember which slide it is, something like that. Yeah, let's say you have such setup, with not 4 microservices, but 20. One service talks to another, 20. So you go through 40 envoys. So 40 envoys, it can add up and add some latency. So you have to make sure that envoy is very quick. It is very quick. You have to make sure that Istio is able to configure it very quickly and does not add too much overhead. And depending on which component you use, it will add some more overhead. The basic, routing, virtual services, are quite okay now. The thing that you gain are better than what you lose in terms of CPU usage. But there's other things that can cost a lot. But they're trying to decrease that. I would say that for the stable features, it's quite okay. It's worth the price. Yeah.
Hello, thank you. I have a question about the deployment of Istio in managed Kubernetes in the cloud. Does it have some limitations?
Okay, so yes, that's a good question because I forgot to say something. So Istio is open source, but you can install on any Kubernetes. So if you have a Kubernetes on-prem, on Google Cloud Platform, AWS, Azure, if you have OpenShift, you can install Istio. It used to be that some of the features were missing in some of the flavors of Kubernetes, but right now, every Kubernetes can run Istio. So it's not a problem anymore. And on Google Cloud, when you create a cluster, you say, I want a cluster and I want Istio. And you've got a checkbox and it's fully managed for you. And it's going to be upgraded for you. So, yeah. One more question maybe, or can we? Yeah.
Very quick.
Sorry.
Very quick one, please, because we have the others already coming in.
Yeah, last question.
Microphone, please.
Excuse me, does it have any logging consolidation or something like that?
You want to consolidate the logs, you said, right?
Yeah.
I think there is, I'm not sure. There's a lot of, it's very pluggable architecture, and there's quite a few plugins that are related to logs. I've never used them, so I don't know for sure. It's described on the istio.io website. Sorry. Thank you very much. If you have questions, you can ask me on Twitter or Gageot.